Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Welcome back, everyone, to another great episode. We've got some exciting things for you today for our new episode.
It is an exciting day because we're going to bring something new. A little bit new.
This is the first time, I believe, today, what we're about to do, very standard episode we've never done before.
We've done one before, but this is actually scheduled at the normal time.
It was a special.
They're both
special.
But this is more special, but just during the regular time, right?
Exactly right.
Exactly.
And my guest can hear us talking right now, but she can't. She knows I can see her, but she can't see me. So so it's great seeing the reaction that's coming here. So with no further ado, let's bring in our guest speaker today. We don't typically have guest speakers. I would love to introduce to you with our team today. The Explicit Measure podcast welcomes Carly. Sorry, I'm putting all the videos in the right spot here.
Put Carly next to you. Put Carly next to you.
It's like a celebrity game where we slide all the celebrities around on the screen. So with that, Carly Newsome is with us today. And Carly is from the Microsoft product team. She has been working to develop features inside the Fabric ecosystem and the Power BI ecosystem. And there's a feature that has been announced at the Microsoft Fabric conference at this March called the Metrics Hub, or give me the right terms again. So it's the...
I know. It's we love confusing naming conventions.
Yeah.
So it's the Fabric metrics layer is
metrics layer.
Got it. Then what you see in Power BI will be the metrics hub.
Okay, so it's a Power BI metrics hub, and then the Fabric metrics layer is the new feature that was presented in the Fabric conference initial keynote. So this has been announced. You can see a very short demo of this, very, very briefly, not to do it justice. So we wanted Carly to come in and do a full demo. So we would also highly recommend go check out our description in the video of this video. Carly does a good 45 minutes demo of like, here's the feature, here's the things you can expect. It's currently in private preview, correct?
Yep.
But this stuff is getting worked on. It's being developed. There's still buggy stuff, but that's why it's in private preview. But it's going to become to us in desktop eventually. I don't want to give timelines because everything can adjust, but it's being worked on actively now. And eventually we're going to see something like this come out for our features. All right. Carly, anything else you want? Did I miss something there? Is there something else you want to add about the feature and what's kind of coming out here?
No, I think you covered it very nicely since we just, it's fresh off your mind since we just did the demo. But the one thing I want to just run it back is what I heard is that I'm a celebrity and very special to this podcast episode. And I just want to make sure that doesn't get glossed over.
Oh yeah.
I don't think there's any question of that at all, because my question back to you is, what does it feel like being the first guest ever to appear during our normal podcast?
Yeah.
Well, it feels pretty good because there's no comparison. Like, you can't compare me to
literally
anyone.
no
I can't do worse than anyone else that's been on here because there isn't. I'm setting the bar. So there's no way I can be below it. So we're doing great. It feels great.
How high the bar is being set is to be determined. But right now we're setting a bar.
and also the celebrity thing. This is the same way how my kids look up to me when I like open up the door with my keys, and it's amazing kind of thing.
Aww.
So, I mean, you're in a very niche, nerdy group. It's like someone wrote a blog and they're from Microsoft. I have to follow them. That's usually the order of operations.
Yeah.
I do feel like we need to share just some fun banter here, just in general. So you'll notice in Tommy's screen, there's this little green ball in the upper right-hand corner of his screen, and this was a memory that came out of the MVP Summit, which was actually right before Fabric Conference. So we went to the MVP Summit. We had a lot of fun. It was Tommy, Seth, myself, and some other MVPs in a house. And if you've ever watched Silicon Valley, there's this little ball thing they have in the Silicon Valley, and they would always chant, "Always blue, always." Yeah. So like this is just bringing back a lot of fun memories of just a really fun MVP Summit. And MVP Summit is the first time we met Carly. I think you've been hiding, doing some very neat things elsewhere in the Power BI teams, and you've just now became a PM, and we're like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, we did meet at MVP Summit, and that was like such a whirlwind because that was the first time we had talked at all publicly about the metrics layer too. So it was so fun because it was like, I really felt like a celebrity because I was like, look at this new thing we're doing. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's live code. Oh my gosh.
Especially that you guys took a left turn with the name of the event. I remember that. It's like, I didn't know I was signing up for this today. Everything's amazing. I don't know what to do.
With our session?
Yeah.
You voiced your disagreement with the name of
No, there wasn't disagreement. No, it was just slight recommendations, opportunities for the future.
Yes, opportunities. We'll go with that.
Yeah. In fact, I don't think there was any disagreement.
None.
It was
I'm gonna be
not
PR.
what we're doing.
So let's jump into the feature a little bit here. So let's talk about this. So one thing I want to just jump in here too, Metrics Hub. So Carly, explain to us, like, why does this exist? Like, give us a little bit of like a heads up for people who didn't watch the demo. This is all on audio, just only portion. Yeah. So give us a little bit of background. Okay, what is the couple challenges we're facing as an organization, and what does this feature kind of fit or fill the gap for?
Yeah, so there's 3 kind of main problems that we always like to talk about when we're kind of teeing up what we're after with the metrics layer. But normally I have some screens to go with this, so I would like everyone who's listening to just quickly close their eyes, and I will paint a picture.
I love it.
Stressful scenario for you.
Stress.
So
let's see it.
Going to be stress running on your treadmills or whatever you're doing, listening to this podcast.
I love it.
So you're in a meeting with your boss's boss. You're in an exec review with your other colleague that you both work on similar features or similar, areas on a sales team maybe. So you pull your metric that you're trying to present to your leadership team from your Power BI report. And then the person who goes right after you, your colleague, pulls their number from a different measure, from a different Power BI report. That's the same value. It's supposed to be showing, like profit margin, but you all are showing 2 different values. Stress. Okay. Your boss is not a friendly person. Your boss's boss is not a friendly person. Everyone's sweating. Everyone's scared. I'm sweating just thinking about it. And because it's very easy to do this, to show slightly different numbers.
Yep.
They're derived from slightly differently defined measures all across Power BI, and they get percolated to all the different Power BI reports.
Yep. So your boss probably looks a lot like Seth. You're scared.
There's a lot going on here, right? Where you sit there.
He doesn't smile.
And what was supposed to be like a highlight or just a point of reference becomes the topic, the full-blown topic of the meeting, and it completely derails.
Yeah.
That's what you're describing, right, Carly?
Yes. And then you're sitting there with your colleague just like,
finger pointing begins.
So then I ask questions like, so why don't your numbers match?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got to look at each other and try to like figure out how to say what you need to say in front of the leadership team. Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting real stressed, guys. I'm sweating.
Seth can add stress like no other. I'm telling you right now. He's good at that.
Come on. What?
But that is one of the main problems that we are trying to solve, right? Better data quality across the entire organization, because with the metrics layer, with the metrics hub, you can take a measure that's rooted in a Power BI that exists in Power BI semantic model and say, I want to elevate this to a metric. And in doing that, you make that number discoverable. You can pair it with dimensions where you can say, these are the groupings that make sense to be paired with this metric. It's searchable. You have a landing page for consumers to just go view it. And you can also use that number in your reports, in your scorecards, in your apps, however you want to create your content in data science notebooks, because it's a Fabric metrics layer. So better data quality across the organization. So reusing that same metric that's intended for reuse so that I keep my job.
This blew my mind. A couple of things that you highlighted in the demo. And again, I'll highly recommend you got to go watch the demo. There's a lot of really rich things in here. Carly demonstrated, okay, we made a metric. We attached some dimensions to it. And this is where I pointed out a little bit of this Michael Kowalski space where Michael Kowalski is doing this. He's another, I think he's on the CAT team, I believe is what he's in. I don't think he's a PM, but he works heavily in the details of Power BI. And he has this concept of like the master and the mini models. So there's this larger, bigger model that has all the dimensions you need, all the measures you may want, many, many fact tables, lots of dimensions, but it's overwhelming to your business users to go get what they need. Like a portion of your model may be related to sales information, not all of it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
How do you highlight that little mini portion of the model? And what you demoed, I think, really, really well was, this is what I think, Tom, you've been talking about this for months about how you need like that consistent metric.
As you said, much longer than just months ago. when we talk about metrics, and because I literally the situation that you just had, I had to just slowly calm down because I just remember those situations. It's something that I share during training, something I share during adoption, because it's so prevalent. And because that at the end of the day, people are trying to find their information. They're trying to find where are they going. And obviously the best avenue is the report. Now, I'm not going to go into the questions yet, but the idea of elevating a metric that you said, it wasn't copying or mirroring a metric. You were elevating one. We'll get into the, I'm going to pause there because
foreshadowing.
So I want to back up 1 second though, because
go ahead.
Either I missed the 2 other points because
Oh, no, I
we
just
went
didn't
by
say
them
them.
for okay. We still haven't covered the
I
3
just
main
haven't
areas.
covered
Okay,
We should pause there and let
I'm
Carly
right
finish
there.
the 2
Yeah,
points. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
We got carried away with the
All right.
stressful
It's what we
drama
do.
that I, you know,
Point 1 was so good. We already see value in point 1.
like, move on.
All right.
No. 2 of the other things that we want to solve with the metrics layer.
Yep.
And Mike, you kind of were just hinting at this with the like how messy and complex semantic models can be. Like they can be beautiful, but massive and super overwhelming to not only end users, but also analysts who are using like that enterprise model to then try to do some like self-service work. Even there can be like, okay, there's a lot going on in this model. I'm not really sure exactly what I should be prioritizing, what I should be using. And so that's where our metrics layer comes in as well, because when you create a metric, like I mentioned earlier, you can say, here's the dimensions, here are the columns that I want always paired with that metric. And what that does is create basically a mini semantic model for that metric and those associated dimensions that our end users can view in a simplified way. And our business analysts who are creating reports on top of that, what would be a really complex, messy semantic model, they can just use the simplified kind of pared down information in that mini model that they know is intended for reuse and for report creation and content creation with the most important like blessed metrics.
I hope today's conversation, I hope the mini model sticks. Like we're talking about mini models here and you're saying it, you're repeating the language. If we could just, I don't know if you've been talking about this already. I don't know who you're talking to this with already, but I really hope that the Explicit Measures podcast has been able to line a stake in the ground here and say, hey, we helped coin the phrase the mini model. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna stick to it. That's awesome.
If anyone asks me where it came from, I'll write it in my spec.
Done.
I'll get credit and then have like an appendix version that's like the full credits, and it's just a podcast.
You know what that reminds me of? Like I don't know if anybody else was. This is a way tangent. Anybody else in choir?
I never did choir
in high school.
I was, but because I'm good.
Like, there was a warm up. Like many mumbling mice are making midnight music in the moonlight. You know, all M's. It kind of reminds me of many models.
Many models. Yeah, I like it.
I guess on a more relevant topic. Are there any fears around how many mini models are created off semantic models? Is this just going to be a sprawl thing, or is it going to be regulated because some of these metric sets and things will rise above the others?
Your second point, essentially. So what happens when you, and let me back up a little bit and elaborate. So what happens essentially is when you create a metric set, that is the fabric artifact, that is the item. And inside of that metric set, you can have, a bunch of metrics that are derived from your Power BI measures, and each one of those metrics has its own dimensions. That whole metric set basically becomes a composite model of just those metrics that are measures and the dimensions. When you reuse them, you can reuse one metric or the entire metric set. So you have that variability. So you're not really you're not creating, when you create one metric, you're not creating a mini model that exists on its own. You can access that mini model inside of the metric set mini model.
This is where I'm going. See?
Yeah.
Many models referencing mini models.
Exactly.
I see.
This is good. But I mean, to your point though, it's a pointer back to the original information. It's not, we're not making other XMLA enabled semantic models. This is just definitions of how do I go get the data for that metric with what dimensions, and it's connecting to that original data model the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay,
And you
cool.
can also certify and promote and, endorse
There we go.
this item, just like you can any other item or artifact, whatever we're calling them right now, in Power BI or across Fabric. So that's another way that you can kind of make sure that the ones that you want elevated are elevated.
Ooh, this makes me think about like, I hope there's metrics in there that are going to let us see this in like the activity log, like in the activities analytics. You have the activity API, and when someone uses something and some action happens in the service, I'm guessing there's going to be some layer of like, oh, look, these metrics have been hit. These metrics have been pulled and made into things. So you will be able to see the noise essentially of when the metrics are getting utilized across our Power BI tenant.
Yeah, that's the plan. And you can do that in like, I want to say many anymore, but you can do that in many ways with our first release where, you'll be able to see metric sets in the lineage view, and you have in the table, you have a table section below each metric that tells you, hey, this is exactly how this metric is being used. It's being used in these 10 reports and these 5 notebooks. So you start to get some of that information, and we'll have like a little bit of free stuff we get in Purview, but we don't have any big plans for Purview yet. Don't come at me yet. Well, eventually, but yet. But that's the idea. You'll be able to track exactly where this intended metric for reuse is being reused and how that's impacting your tenant and your capacity and all that good stuff.
So just from maybe a semi-technical question, every metric set or every metric is still tied and binded to a semantic model, a single semantic model.
It points back to its original semantic model that the measure exists in. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I like the different wordplay, and I don't know if that means a technical difference or not. So
no, that's just one phrasing that we always use when we, so it always has a relationship to, you'll be able to see it in the lineage view that, oh, this metric was created from this semantic model. Because, people, especially our data engineers and our analysts, they often know the names of those semantic models and they trust those semantic models. So we want to make sure we keep that connection so that people say, oh, this measure that's, powering this metric lives in this semantic model that I know and trust. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Like, we're good. That's another indicator of trust that we have built in. And so you can see, where it's coming from in the product as well.
That includes the fields and dimensions. That's still coming from a single model. If I want to update the metric, I have to update the semantic model.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right.
I love it. And was that point number 2 or was there point number 3?
That was point number 2.
Okay. Sorry, Tommy. Did you have another question, Tommy?
I have 100 questions.
Okay. Let's get through point 3 and then we'll come back to Tommy's thousands question.
I'll land the plane. So our point 3 is we often have siloed data that gets stuck in Power BI in the form of measures, right? It's really hard to use Power BI measures outside of Power BI. So enter Fabric Metrics layer. Once you elevate a measure to a metric, you can point to that metric from all the other, Fabric data solutions. So for example, notebooks, we have Senpai integration. So you can be in your notebook and say, I want to go point to this measure that exists in Fabric, or this metric that exists in Fabric, and then pull that in with its, related dimensions or whichever ones you want to include, so that our data engineers and our data scientists aren't having to reverse engineer a measure that already exists in Power BI. They can just use that one.
Sure. Yeah. And this is, I'm going to try and say the name right, because last time we just had an episode on why you care about semantic link, and I kept saying synoptic link. It's semantic link. Yeah. So I got the name wrong. But this is the integration of the feature inside semantic. And Carly again demoed this as well that I thought was really cool. There's like a one button press, like, hey, I want to get the code of the thing out into a semantic link type. You said there's going to be some features added there to make it a bit smoother, but the idea is like you can get the line of code that gives you that metric with some information on it, and you can just land that into a notebook, and boom, I get a table of dates and sum of sales or whatever the metric is being made of as a table.
Yeah. And then I can save that table and that information back to my lakehouse and then use it for, all my other data activities.
Data science. Yep.
Data science.
Data science. All the data science.
Yep.
Excellent. Any other questions, Tommy, that you were thinking about for that one? Does that?
He's like
I said, let's keep the road going.
Let's
keep the show going.
And I think those were your 3 main points, right? So to kind of summarize, one is you have the first point was kind of around making sure that we're building these to increase usability. Second one is we're trying to get rid of the second or third. Data silos are going to be removed.
Mhm.
And we're going to do master model and mini model. That's kind of the other main. Well, I think I got that backwards. Master model, mini model is kind of like the middle option. And then the third one is get rid of data silos. How can we get people access to what they care about?
Yes. Couldn't have said it better myself. Maybe slightly better, but just not that much.
No, I probably way better. You wrote the feature. You've got all the ideas in your head. So
That doesn't mean I can say them off the top of my head. Okay.
I'm trying to track with you.
It's siloed. Okay. We haven't created a metrics layer for my brain yet.
Love it. So where does your mind go, Tommy, on some of these questions? Where are you thinking about how this fits? Because this, to me, what the feature you described, metrics, hub, layers, how all the things are going to come together, is literally what Tommy has been talking about for like eons. He's like, I want an easy way to certify, use this measure and these 3 dimensions. And if it doesn't come out of this certified metrics bundle, don't use it. Don't go out and build your own stuff. We already have it. And making it discoverable, I think, is so challenging for users right now. Because even now I'm building projects for clients where the model we're trying, people are wanting to say, hey, we want to give people access to the models themselves. And so we have to do a lot of work at the model level to like make it super simple so people don't get overwhelmed with all the things that are happening inside the model. If there's too many tables, people get overwhelmed. There's too many dimensions, people get overwhelmed. So how do we really highlight this measure should be used in these ways? And models have thousands of measures in them, especially when you start doing time intelligence. Some people make the decision to not use calculation groups and they build a measure for every single time intelligence things that you want. Well, it's hard for the end user to understand it, right? So if you're not using calculation groups, have a little bit of a unique way of how you need to put them in the visual so you get the output that you want. So in some cases, it's a little bit harder to work with these things. Yeah, it's time intelligence, but how do you best supply that time intelligence information to the visual? And I think this could potentially help out with some of those features.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us solve this problem for you. We aim to please.
Yes, exactly.
So I think it's probably good to start with the first one, the building increased usage and kind of those milestones. And I think my heart always goes honestly to the consumer, to the layperson and organization in their ability to trust and know their data. Mm-hmm. With the metrics hub, by the way, will it say metrics hub like one like data hub in Power BI service?
I actually don't think we use the word hub in the UI, like anywhere in the screens. That's just what we call it. Actually, if any of my designers are listening to this right now, I'm so sorry because I'm pretty sure they don't call it the metrics hub. It's the metrics experience or something. Like there's something else I'm supposed to be calling it. But.
Like the Jimi Hendrix experience, but now it's the metrics experience. I like
exactly.
I love it.
So with really making that prominent, and I'm going to stick on the word they use, elevated metrics, and not just we're highlighting a metric. And I think that, like I said, I could go through the whole soapbox on why that's so important, yada, yada, yada. Was that one of the major origins of having the metrics layer? Was we know that, yeah, we have our corporate reports and our department reports that show here's our numbers this year, but people still don't know if something's filtered, and sometimes there is something filtered, and there's a lot of ways to get there, that it was still not a great experience for what's the number, where are we at, kind of thing. And then I'll start with that. Was that kind of the origin of this? If I could ask, like, where did this really come from?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a big part of it. Like exactly what you described. And then also our end users, it's really, really hard for them to know what is my number. Like they just come into Power BI with one question. Usually they're like, what is my blah metric number right now? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard for them to get that answer if they don't have their report bookmarked exactly right, if it's not refreshed at the same time every day, if they, if something changed and broke, if they can't search for it anywhere. Like you can't search for just that one thing. And so we were like, let's just go ahead and make something where they can come to Power BI and search for their metric, their answer. And then we had to back up and say, well, there's like 3 billion measures in Power BI, like across all of Power BI today. Like there's no way that that's really going to give them their answer, especially because people will recreate the same measures across like every report. So let's first give a way for people to say, this is the metric. And then let's give them a way to surface that in search results. So you can come into Power BI now with the metrics layer, with the metrics hub, and say profit margin year over year, whatever you want to search for, and get a metric result that's like, hey, in your face, this is the one that you should be using. This is not just, we're not like the other measures. We're a cool measure. We're a metric. We have dimensions. We have, we're popular. We're cool. We're, intended to be seen everywhere. So that's really where this came from. I love all of our users, but my heart also really resonates with our business users and our consumers, because that's just the closest, to my own like persona, my own use case. So a lot of this is me being like, how can I make Power BI easier for me to use? Like, how could I not, have trouble finding my own metrics? Let's just go build that. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Tommy, did that answer your question?
Yeah. And I'm thinking about, I wish I could be a fly in the room in this conversation with Microsoft, because to me, this is one of those features where it's like, how is this not out before the last 9 years? So I'm assuming there was probably some harder conversations with leadership or with some of the product team on the risk involved with this, right? Because if we're going to elevate metrics, that's a big deal, because it's going to be who can do it. Are there redundancies, or if we're both creating a metric layer, and more importantly, if like who can do it, and then how do I know that it has the right filters for what I'm trying to look at? Obviously, it's not just as simple as total sales, because if you have your year date or your target, well, that's based on a other measure. So there's a lot of interdependencies. So I guess what were some of the main concerns that were highlighted when this would be really started getting legs, and where has that kind of shaped the product?
Yeah. So two kind of main conversations that we had pretty repeatedly come to mind. So one is this idea of who's going to be creating these metrics, right? Like who's going to be in charge of this. And the way that the place we landed was, it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be a centralized IT department is going to be reserved and, committed to saying, here, out of all, like, I'm going to take inventory of all of our measures essentially and go and create and promote the ones, or elevate the ones that should be metrics. Mm-hmm. And that metrics layer fully will be managed, created, curated by an internal IT department. And then other users will just, access the metrics hub and say, oh, these are the things I want to use. If there needs to be more interaction or inner conversations between those two groups, like, hey, you need to go include XYZ tables in this dimension. Like, we anticipate that that's going to happen anyway, and we're going to build in features that help that interconnectivity, that communication. So that was kind of one piece of it. The other people that are going to be creating this that maybe aren't organizations that are big enough to have an internal IT centralized department or like center of excellence that's going to do this, but still want to use the metrics layer, are really dedicated, chosen creators that people trust across the org. Like, who right now is managing the big enterprise semantic models that you have, even if it's, not an enterprise organization, but it's just, this is the one that we typically use to create all our reports. That person is probably going to be the one who's going through and creating all the metrics, and they're going to be certifying the metric sets for people. And they're probably going to rely on domains to do this a lot too, right? Like, I have my metric sets for my sales domain. I have my metric sets for my finance domain that maybe all point to the same semantic model. Maybe it's 2 or 3, but it's pared down mini models versions of those. So those are the kind of two like groups that we see managing and curating and upkeeping a metrics layer for an organization. But it took us a while to figure out, to land on that. We think that this is what's going to resonate and this is how it's going to play out.
I love those two groups that you're talking to, because I feel like we've all played some role in both of those. So as we've grown up with Power BI, or grown old with Power BI, I guess we're older now. As we grow old with Power BI now, I feel like more conversations are occurring at that central IT level. And maybe that's just my growth is like, as I'm working into larger and larger organizations where top down, we're defining these are the things that we care about metrics wise. That's what we're going to define them as. Yeah. But a lot of times there's also this kind of like, we're in smaller, medium-sized organizations. There's not this great communication pattern across teams. And Tommy, you speak to this one all the time. Like, we define sales as this, but we define sales as that. And we cut our years by fiscal year, but we cut our year by financial year, like, or the calendar year, right? There's all these little different nuances, and like my opinion is, all those metrics are valid. Those measures and KPIs are real. The only difference is, each team, you just need more description. You need more information to tell us why this thing exists, and then someone needs to take ownership, whether it's that dedicated creator or it's the centralized. Someone's got to say, we're saying the same thing. We're saying total sales, but your definition doesn't match mine. So let's change the name of one of them so it meets your needs, but yet we can still have total sales.
Yep.
And then you can kind of talk about that differently. So I think the challenge, we talk about this all the time, the people, the process, and the technology. The technology is clearly outpacing our people and our process. And so I feel like a lot of this is us catching up to the tooling is now giving us more ability to build better process around our people to help them have these conversations we should have been having a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and/or in the past, it was a lot harder to generate useful reports, right? Or pull data from like systems, get it to a place business can digest, and like pushing it into the next steps was harder. And I think with the advent of Power BI, the semantic model, DAX, like all these things that we can generate real time, it gives us a lot more power on the front end to the point now where we can like Microsoft can develop metric sets because we've got so much more feedback from the business using things that are meaningful to them, and they're getting them in such a rapid like cycle that all of a sudden like solving those more business facing problems is now, I think, where we can focus a lot of the attention.
Yeah, absolutely. This actually relates back to what I was going to say is our second, like one of the second things that we were talking about a lot, and one of the risks that we were talking about for metrics layer. We were like, okay, once we have our groups and we know who's going to be creating these, how do we help people know like that they're not creating the same, like how do we not have the same problem that we have with measures with metrics? And so we have some designs in place, and we're going to keep improving these to say, like, this metric set name already exists. Like, do you want to just go take a look at, if
I like that.
On, like, do you really need to create this new metric, or like, in the same workspace even, or in the same, tenant, hey, these things already exist. Like, take a beat. Do you really need to create this? But also we kind of came to the realization that it's not necessarily always a bad thing to have multiple versions of the same metric if they're defined differently and if they're for different audiences or different groups of people, which is, Mike, I think kind of what you were saying too.
Trying to.
Yeah.
In so many words.
I think that's where, domains come into play too. And they're going to be really they're really well poised to partner well with metric sets, because you can have a net sales metric intended for your marketing team, or you can have a net sales metric intended for your, forecasting team that's doing all the forecasting work. And they might be just defined a little bit differently, and that's fine. That's okay. We have other things in place in the viewing of the metrics that are going to allow the end users that are meant to be viewing that to say, okay, this is the one that I should trust, right? We have that usage section that's like, oh, my boss is using this metric. I know Mike and Seth and Tommy have all used this metric to create like all these reports. This is the one that I should be using. Or like, oh, this other metric, even though it has the same name, I can see this description and I can see that this is the one that makes sense for me, and it has the right dimensions, and it's been reused 25 times. That looks good enough for me. So having those additional indicators of trust within the metric itself, because we're saying, it's okay in some scenarios to have repeats of metrics. And that was like a big conversation that we had to have. It's like, we don't want to create the same problem that we have with measures with metrics. Like, how do we fix this? So we put some, guardrails in place, and have also just taken a step back and said, yeah, people are going to do what they're going to do. So let's just make it easy for them to differentiate between the ones that are the same.
So you answer. I love how this conversation is going, because every question I lay out, we're getting to right before I ask it, which is, I guess, great and horrible at the same time.
I use Copilot to read your mind.
Okay. Or we'll just go okay. So as you're going through these different implementation methods of how to like define what the best metric is, in the take a beat one, right? Like is that experience such that you're about to create a metric that is already created and it shows you where that's coming from or who owns it, or how is the person who's generating or creating the metric supposed to understand like where in the ecosystem that lives?
These are great questions that I don't have experience answers for you yet. It's not a part of our private preview, which is happening now, but that will be a part of our public preview, which is coming later this year, probably September. But we're working on like what that looks like. What's the information that people actually want to see? Do they want to see if you're a creator and we're like, take a beat, something like this exists. Do you want to see the other ones that exist, or do you just want to see how they're used? Like what is the information you need to make an educated decision on if you should just spin up another metric that's slightly different for a different team, or if you can say, nope, I'm good. I'm just going to point to this one that already exists.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep my gas, the foot on the gas pedal of hard questions. Hopefully this one's easier, actually. The different metrics, right? So say I've created multiple, and you were saying you can group those by domains, right? So if I have a sales metric for finance, a sales metric for commercial, we know those are wildly different all the time. What about where like needs where like that's fine? It sounds like we can do the domain, right? Marketing is going to be in their realm, finance is going to be in their realm. What about the cross domain need where I need to aggregate these metrics together for the ELT report, and I want those to be sourced from those different places? Can I do that?
Yeah, you can do that in Power BI Desktop. So right now, well, for the public preview, when everyone who's probably listening gets their hands on this, you'll be able to go into Power BI Desktop, and let's say you have your report that you're building for your leadership team, and you're like, hey, I have these two separate sales metrics, one for finance, one for marketing, or I can't remember what the domains you said were, but I want to use both of them in this report to do some aggregations, to play around, to make the visual or the view that makes sense for my leadership team to have in this report. You can actually just connect to those two different metrics from the metric sets. Like you can say One Lake Data Hub, drop down, click on metric sets, which will be an option in the One Lake Data Hub menu, pull in the two that you want to create, and it brings in the dimensions that are related to that metric too, so that you can slice and dice accordingly, and everything makes sense. And then you can, just treat it like a normal measure in a report. You can do any kind of, activities you want to do on it that work on measures. So.
Nice. I like that experience.
Yeah.
And Carly demoed this one. This is another one I would highly encourage. Towards the end of the video, Carly demoed a little example of this one where here's a metric. Here's where you go find it. It's literally in the drop-down menu. Go grab it. A metric shows up. But it was interesting because in our traditional mental model, how my mental model works. In my mental model, typically it was the table and then the measure, and then you'd have other columns, and the columns would have, hierarchies attached to like a date dimension, right? The date column would have a year, month, quarter attached as a hierarchy. When you represented this, the measure was like at the top level, and then the dimensions that you could use against that metric were under like the hierarchical, the elements underneath of it. So it makes a lot of sense that the metric is forefront and center, because if you just drag the metric, it just gives you the number. And then when you want to leverage the date, the category, the type, whatever the other dimensions are, you now have this very concise way of saying, this is your metric, and these are the dimensions that only apply to that metric. And so you can now get this really neat experience there. So very interesting to see how that would, I haven't played with it yet. It's still in private preview yet, but that's one feature I'm very excited. And actually, when you demoed it, it blew my mind, because I was I was like freaking out. I was like, what in the world is happening here? This is totally shifting how I would think about how metrics should be pulled into reports, especially in desktop level. So I was very pleasantly surprised by, to your point, Seth, I've got a couple metrics that may be from different models, maybe not, maybe they're the same, but we can still kind of join them together in this fluid way that still makes sense to the end user.
Yeah. And one more question, and this is by the way, I'm not trying to play Stump the Star celebrity here on the show. I hope this isn't like a hard one. But so in talking about the third part, right, the usage section, I really like that. In solutions that are really, really fully baked, right? Like I have a metrics hubs, metric sets. I can see that this metric by far is the most used across the ecosystem. Kind kind of an open question, first to you, but also the guys, is does, especially in scenarios where the metrics section is gaining traction or being created, do those metrics, usage metrics, inherently drive trust to one metric or the other, or is there going to be, how do we reduce the confusion around which one wins?
So that's I'll answer first, just because from a product perspective of what our pitch is. That section was specifically added based on customer feedback that was like, how do I know which one to choose, right? So that is completely a trust indicator for our users. If I go in there and I look at that metric, if I have two metrics, my sales metric and my sales metric, right? That's confusing. How do I know which one to use, right? If I go in there and look at the contact for who created that metric, and then also at that usage section and see that my boss created a scorecard. I, in the past, didn't remember, but I created like a notebook here. I know the people that are like using these artifacts and creating these artifacts because we have a column that says like who created this artifact, or like who, you know, who's the owner here. So if I recognize names and I recognize report names, like I know I have a pretty good indicator that like that's the one that I should be using. If I go to the other one and I'm like, who the hell's Sally? Can I say hell on this podcast? I don't know. Sorry.
Well, I will say there are some, we do try to keep it PG. I probably should have made a disclaimer for you.
Sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. I do know that there are some leaders inside Microsoft who have their kids and they listen to it on their way to dropping kids off at school and stuff like that. So just, you probably be okay.
Heck is Sally?
There we go. We got it covered.
And I'm like, I don't really recognize any of these people, any of these owners here. I don't recognize any of these reports.
Yeah.
And then one step further, I might not see a ton of usage for metrics that aren't really applicable for me, because I have to have access to those things to see them right now anyway. They have to be like in some kind of pipeline where I have a permissions access. So if I go and I stumble across a metric that I have access to for some reason, but I don't have access to like anything in the usage section, that's also probably a pretty good indicator that maybe it's not the one for me. If there's another one that exists that has the same name with people I recognize, that the usage section looks super full to me.
Ooh, that's interesting. I didn't even put those two pieces together, but yeah. Should you be using it if you can't even see any of the reports that people made on top of it? It's above your pay grade, bud. That's interesting.
It just depends on the permissions that you have. So right now it works like any other artifact. So I can share the artifact, but I will also we want to make sure that this is safe. So you can share the artifact and it shares permission to the metric set. But if you don't have access to the underlying semantic models within that, like where the measure is defined, that the metric is pointing to, you'll get a little UI that says like request access. And then that will request access to the underlying semantic model that's powering the measure. So you could get access that way, but still not have access to the rest of the reports that are like used, from that metric. So it's still a good trust indicator, even if like you get by and you get access to this metric that you maybe shouldn't have access to somehow.
I think you alluded to this earlier. You're talking about basically build permissions. In order to use the metric, you have to have build permissions on the data set or the semantic model.
That's
correct.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, if I want to use it in a report, or if I want to save an exploration that I do, or if I want to use a notebook or whatnot, I need build permissions to the underlying semantic model.
I think you make a really good point here, because this is a very confusing, I think, aspect for people in general with like the workspaces and who's supposed to access them. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk around governance. Like, okay, if I'm a developer of reports and models or semantic models, I should have access to the workspace. But if I'm not, if I'm just consuming content, what does that mean? And because I can have access to the semantic model, and now with lakehouses, you can also have access to the lakehouse with not having access to the actual workspace itself. So there's this weird Venn diagram and occurring in my head between like, okay, do I first own access to the workspace? Well, yes, I get access to all the artifacts, but you can have scenarios where I can carve out like a portion of a workspace where I give users just access to like the app. Well, you can see things in the report, but not all the reports. It's a lens of what is inside the application. Or I may give access to build permissions on the semantic models or lakehouses, but it's not access to the workspace. So it's another surface area of who is owning the responsibility of said workspace, said reports. And I think this is also very interesting, because I did note in your demo, there's a really clear call out as who created, who owns this metric set. And I think that's going to be incredibly important as we try to govern this. I feel like there's a lot of conversation around where do we draw the boundaries between reports, semantic models, lake houses? Like there's a whole bunch of things that we're all smushing together. Where do we draw the lines? And I think we have the ability to draw the lines anywhere we want. Now, where does it make sense to draw those lines? I don't know if that makes any sense at all. I'm just trying to, in my mind, I'm drawing pictures in my head right now. I'm already diagramming things out and like drawing lines around these different artifacts. It makes sense to me, but like, I think it's hard to articulate that in a picture or a document to external users, like what's happening here.
No, it is 100%. You're absolutely correct. And I think that, our team is aligning to what we can say for our metrics hub team and our metrics layer team is like, here's the best practices, right? Give viewer permissions to the workspace if you want people to view this metric set, or you can, share directly. Like we can figure out what our best practices are and go, say, hey, here's how you should share it out. But that doesn't mean that the problem goes away or gets any less confusing, right? Like this is a more holistic problem. I think that Power BI all up needs to like come together and solve. Like, what does that Venn diagram look like, and how is it a little bit less confusing to share with our consumer family? You know.
Well, I mean, there are definitely many different ways to share many different types of content, and they are all different. Well, a lot of them are different.
Yeah.
One of the key things I'm glad you incorporated based on the feedback is the contact, because I think what that allows, at least in the initial startings up of things, is to create, a communication between the business and or users to say, hey, here are the primary users that you should all, like, if they've created a report or they're the owners or they're the ones building this metric, follow their lead, don't recreate something. An interesting thought comes to mind from the standpoint that it almost strikes me as an area I'd love to see like AD groups instead, because I may have a team of people, and rather than having the organization have to understand every single user that's doing something, if they're part of that team, then it's the BI team. You don't like it doesn't go beyond that, right? To simplify the level setting of which metric should be used. Yeah.
Well, Seth, have I got great news for you? We have that. You can have an AD group or a security group in there. I
love it.
It just needs to be an email. So,
okay,
that's fine. Like we support that.
So an email enabled security group would just go fit right in there. No problem. Love it. So you mentioned something very briefly. And I want to ask you, I want to pick your brain a little bit on, you said you can save the metric set. I guess I've never really understood where do you,
I said share.
Share. Maybe I said it the wrong way. Maybe you said it's thing. Where does it live? Like, so is the metric set, like, is it like, in my mind, I'm thinking, is this a new line item in the workspace that says metric set?
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Okay. And then that thing, that line item gets stored. It's kind of in the context of the workspace. So the workspace, and it doesn't have to be in the workspace where the semantic model lives.
No, it does not.
So you can have, oh boy, this is my head blowing up now. So we can have semantic models fitting in its own workspace. So here's the reason I'm saying this is because I'm thinking about, like, I go to the dev test prod, CI/CD pipeline, the whole enchilada of like what's going on here. So I typically right now I have a report workspace where I put my reports. I have a separate workspace where I put all my semantic models. And I'm even now thinking about maybe there is a data engineering workspace where I do all the lakehouse development. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like we could also have a separate workspace for metric sets. So there's a metric set workspace. It can still point at other workspaces that have semantic models in them, but it can be its own storage pile of just here's where all the metric sets live.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a great implementation.
Whoa. Again, my head's just melting in the concept of what this could be. Tommy's getting happy now.
No, honestly, I'm doing the Italian thing and I'm thinking of all the possible worst case scenarios here.
Oh no, I have to go.
Oh no!
It was so great to see you, Carly.
It was so great to see you. Well, and I'll tell you, and I'll be not negative at all, but let's look at scorecards. Right, when scorecards came out, I was over the moon, and Honestly, we didn't. I don't think I saw with clients the takeoff or the adoption that
Mhm.
I was expecting or that I thought it could provide. It's like, hey, now you take all your data from your entire team project and have it in a consolidated place. And one thing's trying to manage the scorecard and trying to manage each of those. I guess they're called metrics or goals in scorecards, which you probably might have to change. Is, obviously it was connected to the report. So it's still, where's this number coming from and that truth? And then obviously if something changed. And I think that's where I'm going is we also know semantic model change because the metrics hub is going to be so wonderful for executives, for a team, for people wanting to look at bonus, they're trying to see, like you said, just the normal information. However, it doesn't matter if it's easier and it's a nice one metric on a page, but if we go through and we're modifying the semantic model, obviously from the business input, has there been a discussion on, I don't want to say version history, but change management when it comes to some of these numbers?
Well, I can tell you how it will work, and maybe you can ask a follow-up question because I think the answer is yes. If the DAX definition changes, or if you're changing something in the semantic model, and we have a metric that's connected to a measure, that metric will update.
Okay. Will that be visible at all for users?
I see. Not for our end users.
Right.
No, not
Okay.
for our end users, at least not right now. But early days, I mean, if this is something we hear from all of our private preview feedback that is about to start funneling in, then we'll go build it.
Well, guys, we had the conversation last week when it came to the data documentation that went into its own little journey about major semantic models and going through, like, if something were to drastically affect that model
Downstream.
Yep. Whether it's something out of our control or not, how can that be reflected? Because again, if I'm an executive, like, oh, this metric hub, here's our budget to actuals number, great, and that's what they look at. All of a sudden, it drastically changes. That it defeats the entire purpose.
Yeah.
So I'm just going through that.
Yeah, it's almost like the check-in history we have in scorecards.
Yeah.
Some kind of implementation like that to show, like, here's,
even if it's like a last, yeah, but like, what would you track as far as a change, Tommy? Right? Like,
yeah.
But this is so I think, but I don't think this feature is designed for that. I mean, so where I would push on this one, I like where you're going, Tommy, but I think that's actually more of a process related thing that needs to be happening at the semantic model level. And I think this is where John Kursky would talk a lot about data ops. Like, this is where semantic link, and this is where we talked about semantic link. This is where semantic link, I think, shines, honestly. Mm-hmm. I think there needs to be a very clear, I've made a model, I'm doing a change, I'm reloading some new information. Before that model gets out into production, there should be some clear process that says, we're going to run this, semantic link on this dimension with these different things. Let's count the numbers. Let's make sure the numbers haven't changed delta from this month to last month, or whatever the baseline is. If we can verify that those numbers are in fact correct, then we can then promote into production. Then there's no issue. So I think you're addressing a problem, Tommy, that should be solved with process earlier in the model.
But it's not. If anything, this isn't adding to that problem, Tommy. Like, if you're not doing any of that or checks and balances to ensure, like, your measure that could be used in n number of reports, if something breaks, all those reports are broken. So Correct. Just because you have a single consolidated metric, this isn't adding to that. It's just, I think, maybe potentially reinforcing that you should have the checks and balances like Mike is outlining.
That's where I'm going with it.
So I'll kind of not shift gears, but I'll kind of say, like, kind of the origin of the question, because, okay, that's process. And here's the thing, though, if you start talking to your executive, oh, well, we have a data ops, they barely care what a semantic model is right now. They really just, want to get to the report now. If their primary means, and one can make the argument for some of these metrics, the primary means of someone getting to a number is going to be through the metrics hub, not necessarily the report. And
saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. All you're introducing is another layer, hopefully easier for the business to digest. Whether it's there or whether in a report, your breakdowns, this doesn't complicate things.
And ladies
Your
and gentlemen,
issues are before this.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is the conflict portion of our type of episode where we think it's really interesting. So this is where we have different opinions. So this is why I think we love beating these ideas up so much, because there is different ways to lens our way into this. And I think we can solve these problems so many different ways. And I agree with you, Seth. I think I agree with you. This is just one more thing. If the metric breaks, any number of Excel reports or other reports, it's going to just fall apart anyways. So this is just a better way of trying to get that exposure to those things in front of users to make it easier for them to consume pieces. I don't think this is necessarily meant to be your data quality checker at this point. And I think that's a process left upstream in front of the model.
So I've one final real quick question, because I know we're nearing end of time.
Yes,
which
please.
is probably a very easy answer. So I know I can save metrics as kind of a report or an exploration, because I've watched some of the demos. Can I embed those objects for external use applications?
In an app or in external?
External.
Okay, so
I have
Seth and I are on the same page on this one.
Have the same problems.
Same problem,
right? I want to simplify this stuff, and you are giving me a feature that lets me just give them the metric, or better yet, a guided experience called the metrics exploration, where you get 3 dimensions, and then they can pretend they're building their own report, because that's the pie in the sky, which nobody ever builds.
No,
but if I give them a tailored experience like that externally,
huge,
great.
So the short answer is
coming
yes.
out. Right in public preview.
That's what I don't have a timeline.
Okay.
That's what I don't have a timeline.
But it's on the roadmap.
Likely not, but it is on the roadmap. Yeah, it's not
huge.
I will say that huge differentiator for those cases where you're putting Power BI out in front of many customers. I think that's a fantastic experience, and I'd front load that if I were a PM for.
Are you coming for my job?
No. I'm saying I'm just
trying to get you to get this feature earlier.
Nudging you to say that should be a priority. That's all.
I heard I'm coming to take your job, Carly. That's what I heard.
No, I don't want your job, Carly.
No,
I am not a superstar.
Are you sure? No, I'm just kidding.
It's a really good thing, and I think Microsoft is doing incredible things inside the Power BI.com experience. Another one that I really want is the paginated report builder experience. I can embed paginated reports as an embedded experience, but I can't do the editor as an embedded experience yet. So these are things that are top of mind. We build huge applications on top of Power BI, the ecosystem. The more exposure we can get to, again, this is hard because there's another team that's doing all the embedded experience stuff, but the more we can get that any experience, if I can build a report, a paginated report, or not only the rendering of the output of it, but also the creation of it is hugely valuable for us as developers to be able to incorporate that into our products. Yeah. So, all right. With that, I want to thank everyone very much. Carly, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You've been wonderful, and we really appreciate your time taken away. I know you're busy. You've been doing a lot of things. Thank you so much for jumping on, bantering with us about all these things about metrics. We're excited for the feature. I think this is going to be huge. We're going to continue to shout your praises to the ends of the earth of how great this cool feature is going to be. People need to try it out. It's going to be awesome. I think this is going to change. I feel there's a couple moments in Power BI where I feel there are some pivotal things that will change how you do your work. To me, this feels like one of those moments where I'm going to physically change how we do work with these things. This will be a very big talking point, I think, in the future for helping more people consume Power BI. So usage is just going to go up.
Well, that's what we love to hear, especially from people who are using the product. So awesome. we love to hear it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. We appreciate you listening to the podcast. You've wasted a perfectly good hour with us bantering about this new thing, this new feature coming out. We really appreciate your time. We know it's valuable. We hope your bicycle, your run, your walk, whatever you're doing right now, I hope you had a good exercise. We appreciate your time. Our only ask, if you like the podcast, if you like this conversation, let us know in the comments or share it with somebody else who's going to engage with this content as well. We'd love to continue sharing the podcast with other people. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.